When I first bought my old coach house, I didn't realise that these were under the floor, and I certainly didn't realise why they are so important, and I'm going to tell you the story about it, which starts with me lifting up the floors. The first job was to get the floors lifted up, because they were set up for animals, for cows and for pigs to be precise. You can tell from the troughs and the parts that were kicking around in the building. Now, when we got into the actual coach house itself and lifted up the floor, I was stopped in my tracks because underneath all of the concrete revealed a grid-like pattern made up of these blocks. And the only thing that intersected the grid was the cast iron parts that were made in the very iron foundry that this coach house served. So there were two poles which were part of the stables, the stable posts, which you can see in this nearby stable, in this livery. And there were also some gutters which will be connected to some long gone sewers now. The blue bricks that were in the room were a Victorian solution to quite a complex equation involving waste, coaches and horses. I instantly fell in love with these. And I loved how it told the story of the coach house, of how it was used. It was filling in some pieces of the puzzle. It took me quite a long time to come to terms with the fact that these needed lifting up. They were no good as a workshop floor. They were all over the place. You couldn't sweep up, it was dirty. And I just had to say, no, they're going to have to come up. I can use them another time. So the days serving horses and coaches were long gone. I mean, I could have got a horse that likes car parks, but in reality, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. So one day, I sat on with my pry bar to lift these blocks up, and I still didn't know what they were made of. I just knew that they were beautiful. And I had maybe allotted a couple of hours to get them lifted up, but it ended up taking a couple of days because they did not want to move house. They were held together, or the thing that filled the gaps up was this strange mortar or grout which I'd never seen before, something else I couldn't identify. It looked like it had been poured in after the bricks had been laid. So that's another mystery, which we'll go into. Usually when I'm pouring something that sets hard like that, I'm thinking, please don't be me that has to undo this. And I'm sure the person that poured that grout in was thinking exactly the same thing. Even though I spent a couple of days getting all of the grout off these blocks, looking at them, I was still none the wiser to what they were. They were very, very hard. If you cut them or broke them, they stunk of eggs, so that's sulphur dioxide. And they each have their own individual personality. They're deformed in different ways, they've expanded and contracted like a brick would, and the same goes for the colouring as well. They each have a personality. And I didn't think that they could be granite because they look like they've been moulded, and they're too hard to be a clay, I think. And that's when the eureka moment happened, because I'd been talking about them so much. A friend and subscribers said that they were Scoria. Now, let me just get something. This is a vase that my great-grandmother gave me. It's an ancient Greek story. And the reason why it's relevant is because scoria is an ancient Greek word for excrement. So it's pretty minging. They decided to call these blocks scoria blocks because they were made of waste, they were made of excrement. Something that they didn't want. It's a reused thing, which I love. They've reused rubbish, essentially. Now I know what I'm looking for. I seem to be seeing them absolutely everywhere. They're down alleyways, down driveways, down ginnels. There's just seams of these spread across the country. And even though they seem to be abundant, I wouldn't stop that from making us think that they're precious or that we shouldn't treasure them, because they are really, really special. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to say the reason that I recognise this type of block is because they're right outside the front door of my old house. To understand why these are special, we need to go back to the 1860s when we were producing a horrific amount of iron. We were making railways, we were making trains to go on the railways, we were connecting places that had never been connected with rail so that we could export things and sell things and do things there. Then we were making bridges so that places were even more accessible over rivers and over valleys. We were making big boats, huge iron vessels which were capable of carrying way more weight and going faster than the sailing boats. And then we were making industrial machinery to process metal even faster and make things out of metal. It was just a snowball effect, and it was an insatiable thirst for iron, something that could never be quenched. The more we could make it, the more we could use it. And that had one great big caveat: waste. Something I think we can all relate to in this plastic age that we're living in. That's where this block comes in. There's no way around the waste problem when you consider the fact that to get iron, you need to extract it out of a rock. And the rocks came from mines, which were quite close to me, mines and quarries. And they're up on the Cleveland moors, up on the North Yorkshire moors. And the most notable one that I can think of is up at Rosebery Topping. And there were a lot of mines around there, and they could have potentially created the formation of Rosebery Topping. It's got quite a distinguished peak, and in 1911 a landslide caused that distinguished peak. It lowered its mountainness and it left it with quite a saucy little feature on the landscape, which became a tourist attraction. But anyhow, we took iron from places like Rosebery Topping and took it into places like Middlesbrough. That's where it could all be processed. And to process it, it would get heated up in a great big furnace up to around 1500 degrees. And then the same stuff I make my lime mortar with, quicklime, was added into the mix. And what would happen is all of the impurities from the iron would bind to the quicklime. It was added as a flux, and that would leave you with two materials: slag stuck to the furnaces, and it would leave you with iron as well, and hopefully a nice pure iron that was good quality. So that meant that the impurities that were left were a strange mixture of rock and metal. So in the 1860s and 1870s we could produce up to 2 million tonnes of iron per year, which gives you an idea of the amount of slag that was being produced. And the slags were such a problem for the ironmasters. They were piling up in the yard and they were probably pulling their hair out thinking, how do I get rid of all of this? The ironmasters had a sneaky trick up their sleeves. They would run a train line to the beach in Skinning Grove and tip out the slag when it was hot and leave it there to stay. And that's what those cliffs are made out of, 100% iron slag. And they even built a jetty out of the stuff, which they tried to destroy in World War II, but they couldn't because it was too blooming hard, so they had to give up. So they were worried that the Germans were going to have a helping hand coming into the country. And although it wasn't going to solve any waste problems, it could be added to a lime mortar mix to make it cementitious, much like adding a pozzolan. It makes it hydraulic and it sets underground. But they really could do with finding a way of reusing this. And the frustrating thing is that we'd been using copper slag blocks. No, Ziggy. The frustrating thing for the Victorians was they knew that you could make a useful material out of metal slag, but they'd only been able to do it with materials that melted at a lower temperature. They hadn't figured out how to do it with iron, which needs about 1500 degrees Celsius to melt it. Not far off what it is in here at the moment, it's boiling. And I believe copper only needs to be about 900, 1000 degrees to melt that. And a good example of a copper slag building is Black Castle in Bristol, which was built by one of these unethical business types. It had a copper mine also in Bristol as well, and he'll have been able to smelt it and get the blocks from it to build his castle. Anyhow, we get to 1869, and a very clever chap called Joseph Woodward from Darlington, nearby Darlington, figures out a way of getting the molten slag out of the melting pot and then straight into a mould without it cooling down too much to go solid. But the other tricky part is that the blocks have got to be kept warm for 3 days. If they cool down too quickly, lots of weird stuff starts happening and you get an unstable product. That's no good to sell. For a few decades they make this product and everybody wants it because it's got so many amazing properties. It's really hard, it's frost resistant, it looks great, it makes a flat smooth road that's a lot better and cheaper to lay than cobbles. And then the other thing is that the very reason why it's been in my coach house is because it's resistant to horse urine, and the grout that's been used to fill in the sides of these blocks has had this crushed up mixing with the lime mortar to help make that resistant to urine. And interestingly and quite disgustingly, when I've been knocking off the grout from these, every now and again I'd get a strong whiff of horse manure. And it's strange because you can see that it's been a coach house building. It's got all of the things there to say that it was a coach house. People could tell me it's a coach house building that had horses in it. But when I smell it, it makes it so real. I can smell the horse that was there, which is quite strange really, to have an extra sense inundated with information. So it's the 1900s and things aren't looking great for the Scoria Brick Company because the world is changing, times are changing, and we've got big tarmac and big concrete taking all of the work. By 1969, Scoria Brick Company goes bankrupt, and by 1972 it ceases trading altogether. And now we have some lovely reminders down alleyways, under tarmac roads apparently we've tarmacked over an awful lot of streets full of Scoria blocks. They've been recycled, put around people's gardens, put around people's car parking spaces and things like that, which is nice. And I'm seeing them, I really am seeing them everywhere now. And the place that I've been seeing these a lot is in here. And this is the room that you saw at the beginning of the video where I was lifting these up. And it's now been insulated with underfloor heating put down, and we're ready to carry on putting it back together. And it's changing the purpose of these blocks. They've gone from being used for horses and coaches to now useful for people. And I love the ethos and the story behind them. They're the unwanted child of the melting pot. They would literally have been chucked off a cliff at Skinning Grove if it wasn't for ingenuity, for the clever people that decided to make it into something useful. And it's interesting that the golden child appears to be rusting, whereas these remain unaffected by time. And I can't help but wonder what there is now that we're producing that we think is waste, that in the future, because of the lack of resources and because it comes from a finite place, is going to end up being scarce and extremely valuable and desirable once we appreciate its qualities. So that's going to be it for this video. Thanks very much for watching. It's been fun to make, very time consuming, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and please let me know if you have. Ciao for now.